Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. In this episode, part 2 of 2, we continue our conversation with Rhonda Roos, author of The Deliberate and Courageous Principle, 10 Leadership Actions and Skills to Create High-Achieving Schools. As a new principal or new vice principal, you'll want to listen in to some terrific stories and practical tips like simplify your school systems in order to focus on teaching and learning. And secondly, set just a few clear learning targets for the whole school.
Today's podcast is brought to you by the word courage, from the Latin meaning heart. The ancient Greeks considered it a fundamental virtue. Courage in modern psychology is an important factor in overcoming fear and achieving personal resilience, something every school leader needs for sure.
At the end of this episode, be sure to visit our website, www.restorative.ca, where you can find some great ideas on leadership in schools from a restorative relational perspective. If you enjoy this episode, be sure to subscribe on Spotify or YouTube. So let's head over to this discussion already in progress with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. Can you speak to that? Because that's fear of being vulnerable. Can you speak to how new principals can overcome that fear?
I think because when we talk about building relationships, we talk about just building trust with people. And how do you build trust with people? Now, we talk about it so much, you all, it almost sounds so commonplace, but it's not so commonplace in actions for me. If I say something, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be reliable in that sense. So I need to be careful in what I'm promising and saying to staff. I want to be clear. I think that builds trust. I want to do what I say. I want to be reliable. You can think of times, I can tell you stories. My principal said he was going to come and observe me, and then he didn't. I thought, well, he didn't show up. What happened to be my mama was the secretary at the school where I was teaching. And I ran down after school. I said, Mom, Mr. So-and-so didn't come to observe me. Oh, she was like, let me check on it. So he said, oh, yeah, tell her I'll be there tomorrow. So the next day I'm ready, right? He didn't come. He said he was going to come. He did not come. My trust level bottomed out. Now I had my evaluation form in my box that said, everything looks great. Just sign that with a little sticky on it. I'll never forget it. Everything looks great. Sign that and get it back to me. And that was my very first year of teaching. So when you say you're going to be there, then be there for your people, right? I think we need to hold people accountable because I think it builds trust. These teachers were older than me. A couple of them were teacher of the years. I was scared of them. And it took me too long. You let things go, which loses trust with your good, solid teachers.
How did you do that? Very easy and a lot of fun to work with people who are working well. It's the person who isn't doing so well, who isn't being on time, who isn't following through in the lessons. So what kinds of things happened early on to you in those kinds of situations where you had to act with staff to correct them? And how did that change your practice?
Stan, early on, here's what I did not understand. Two things. One was about conflict. That's a side story, but this one on accountability. I thought the teams, like the English department or the 6th grade team, I thought they would hold each other accountable. And then I learned very quickly, they are not going to hold one another accountable until they see their leader hold people accountable. I firmly believe people deserve in an organization to see accountability if the leader has been clear up front. Here are the expectations. Okay. I read Peter Singe's The Fifth Discipline. That was a difficult book for me to read, but he has frameworks in there. One of them is called Real Dialogue. So this is when I got brave, right? It's a circle divided into 4 quadrants. So simply put, you start in the bottom left-hand side with polite. You start the conversation and you're polite with this teacher. Let's use the example who has been tardy several times. Okay. Then you move over into the quadrant called disagreement. And when I'm in that quadrant, here's what I learned. I have to have my data. So I have to know before I have the conversation how many times Mrs. Smith has been late, on what days, because I don't want to argue about that. I've got my data ready. Okay. And then after I present that, I got to back off and let Mrs. Smith be upset with me and say everything she needs to say. And Peter Singay says right here is where most educators turn around and they go right back to polite. They'll say, okay, just do better on that. Okay. And then that's the end of the discussion. And Peter Singay says, you got to get on up into the next quadrant above, into what he calls inquiry, and ask questions of the teacher and let the teacher ask questions. Listen, is there anything I can do to help you or explain to you more why I need you here on time by contract, etc.? What could I do to help? Blah, blah, blah. And then the final quadrant he calls real dialogue is, okay, listen, I think we've been clear. Okay. But I want to make sure I give you clarity here. If you're late again, this is what will happen. Where every now and then, maybe more often than I think, what about that sarcastic, mean teacher? The data are things I hear them say, right? That's my data. Like we'd have a teacher, in a special ed meeting one time, we were trying to write an IEP who was just very derogatory toward the mother. So I wrote down exactly what he said. There's my data. I heard him in the cafeteria say something to an 8th grade student. Oh, that's it. And now I'm going in for a real dialogue. Hey, you need to know it's not okay with me when you say things like this and this. Not okay to me. Up into inquiry. Can you help me understand why you would say, right? You just follow the same thing, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. I think the last thing I would add would be, as I'm building trust with people, I want them to know I'm vulnerable. I'm going to share with them things where I've messed up. I'm going to apologize and I'm going to do better. It won't happen again. I got it. I'm sorry, staff. Let's go. I can remember one time it happened in a full faculty meeting, and I'm pushing them. I forget what I was asking them to do. And the English teacher, she was the department chair, Carol. I can see her right now. She said, Rhonda, she raised her hand. Rhonda, I got to stop you a second. In the full faculty meeting, 90 people, okay? She said, I got to stop you a minute. I said, yes, Carol, what you got? She said, you're killing us. You're killing us. We're doing this and this and this. It's too much. It's too much. Can we just do what you've already asked? And then we'll add that on in the last quarter. So here's where I had to be vulnerable and go, Carol, just in the 30 seconds I've thought about this, you're right. Thank you for saying that. I'm sorry. That was too much of a, right? Things like that, I think, as staff, because my experience showed me that teachers they're so good, they'll just about kill themselves to do the work. They really do, when they know you've built a relationship with them and you're being honest with them.
We say, kids, you have to learn from your mistakes. But when we get to adults, we say, I don't make mistakes.
Yeah, yeah. And Stan, you reminded me of one of my top 10 was this. I think it's a good one. When I mess up, comma, please come to me, right? And I love that adverb.
When,
because I'm going to mess up, staff, but when I do, instead of talking about me bad in your department meeting and grade level meeting and in the teacher's lounge, do y'all have something called the teacher's lounge? We still do. Okay, teacher's lounge. Instead of doing that, will you please come to me? Come to me, help me make it right. So I have that one in my top 10. When I mess up, because I think that's a clear signal to staff. Oh, I'm going to mess up. I don't mean to, but I will. Yeah.
it's just that vulnerability and the when. That's what I mean. You're already setting it up that I haven't got this all figured out. So that's a message that you staff, you don't need to have it all figured out either. We will mess up and we will learn from it and we'll be okay. Same sort of thing you were saying, Stan, about the kids. That's the messaging we give them, but we're supposed to have it all figured out as soon as we're an adult.
And I remember another principal saying to me, you never admit your mistakes to your staff because now they're going to think you don't know what you're doing. Just move on, move past it. And so that has evolved and changed so much now that, to your point, when you make a mistake, acknowledge the mistake, learn from it. If you have to go and apologize to a teacher, go and apologize to a teacher. If you have to apologize to a student, apologize to the student. Losing face, you're actually gaining respect by doing that. And that's the part that I think a lot of administrators, depending on their age and where they've come from, they tend to think that I'm in charge now. I'm going to be right all the time, even if I'm not. And I can't let people know I'm not right because they'll think I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, you can actually. And you'll gain more in the long run by doing that. But I don't think they see that necessarily. It's tough. It's tough.
For new administrators, I would imagine that you've got your supervisory people watching what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So you better have it all figured out. That's the voice in your head, right? I can't make mistakes because they're watching what I'm doing, which in some cases may be true. You can't make mistakes, but in other cases, we know those that are more seasoned know that's part of the process. So they've got these push and pull of these two things. I've got to meet all these goals. They're watching. This is what they expect from me. However, I feel this is how I need to be doing it.
It has a lot to do with the old hierarchy of education. And yes. Back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, you talk to people who say school was better back then. They all acknowledge the hierarchy. The principal's in charge. They're in charge of the school, and you do whatever the principal says. The teacher's in charge of the classroom. You do whatever the teacher says. And if the teacher says do this and you don't, by the time you come home, you're going to get it from home as well. We all understood that. We all understood that hierarchy. And that hierarchy, while it exists on paper, doesn't exist in reality in terms of how schools operate anymore.
Oh, it is tough and scary. And once you are more of yourself in that sharing of yourself, we know how staff responds to that. But for my years of working in middle school, and I'm going to call that grades 5 to 9, that was my main experience as an administrator. Boy, kids were so wonderful. They know, they watch you, and they know if they can trust you or not. And when they know they can trust you, kids will do anything for you. I think the one thing academically that was the hardest work I ever did was learning to teach children to read, because I was a secondary English teacher. And if you reached 7th grade and didn't know how to read, oh, I even hate admitting this, and here it'll be on a podcast, but it's okay. It should be. If you could not read by the time you hit 7th grade, I'm sorry for your luck, right? You might have been in special ed. Maybe that special ed teacher knew how to teach kids to read, but not in our building. So we determined that if a child was not reading at grade level, and really the younger we got them at 5th grade, it helped us. Then they had their regular English class, and they also had a second English class where we're going back to some of those basic skills. It's all the science of reading things now to help them, right? And catch them up as quickly as we could. But here's where I'm going to come back to honesty. I can remember 8th grade, we'd have some big football player boys, and I would be honest with them and say, listen, you are not reading at grade level. I need you reading at 8th grade. Look here at this chart. Here's where you are. You're at a 5th grade, 7th month. You can do it because we have not shown you how to do it. And now we are. This is on us. This makes me get weepy when I think about it. It's on us as your teachers. We did not give you what we needed. Forgive us on that. Here we go. We're going to get you reading before we send you on to New Albany High School. Now that was hard on teachers. And I thought, well, if I'm going to make the teachers learn how to teach kids to read, I got to learn myself. So we went down to elementary school and learned how to run these things. But those boys, girls, all of them, you all know that. They're like, okay, thank you for saying that. It's not on me then. So thank you. And they'd go to those classes. Our teachers ordered little, what do we call them? Kidney-shaped tables like you have in elementary. We got them for every classroom in the middle school. And those big old 8th graders would be sitting at the kidney table in small groups, going over phonemes and everything else. We got them. We had 33% of kids coming to our building. By the time they left, we got it down to 18. That's still horrific data, but we were getting there, right? But that's when you're honest with kids, when you're honest with adults, and they know you've got their back. They know that you want good for them. They'll just do anything, I believe.
Right.
I had a flashback to walking in as principal on a group of grade 8s playing cards around the table. And I was just watching, because as somebody would win, they would move up and the loser would move down to the end of the table. And I said, so what's this game? And this one student who I saw fairly regularly in my office said, oh, that's the principal, the person who ends up getting sent down to the end. Well, actually, the real name of the game is asshole.
Oh, yeah.
And the person who has to move down to the end of the table is the asshole. But he said, oh, that's the principal.
Oh, there's nothing like middle school
Oh,
kids.
my
There's really
goodness.
not.
They're smart.
In my own family, if you say, wow, stop being such a principal, it has a different meaning.
Oh, that's so funny. The middle school kids, always honest.
As you worked with other staff, what kinds of characters or characteristics did you look for to encourage people to become principals or vice principals or assistant principals? Like, how could you recognize somebody in your school that you thought, hey, you've got some potential to be a school leader in a different way?
That's so interesting, Stan, because I don't think I've ever been asked that question. And what I was doing was I was reflecting on people who I had encouraged. And here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people like Leslie, etc. I'm seeing all of these people. And I'm going to tell you the number one characteristic. They were tremendously good to other people. So they were highly effective, right? They're competent, they can teach, but equally as important, maybe even a little more important, they were highly relational with other people. People were drawn to them. They had high influence. Maybe that's the way we say it. High relational, highly influential in a good, positive way. They were making it, people listen to them, right? So even if a teacher was maybe not my most highly effective, I can teach a few of those things. Like, here's how we teach, da, da, da. But if they were good with people and had a good balance where they could be humorous at times, because listen, it's gut-wrenching inside schools right now, right? So there's some humor in there, a little bit funny, but they're still getting it all done. That's who I encouraged. That's who I look for. And as I even think about it now, I never planned to be a principal, ever. I was a guidance counselor. I loved that life. I loved that life. And my principal came to me at the high school where I was the guidance counselor and said, we want you to go back and get your administrative degree. And I said, yeah, no, thank you. I'm not really interested in that at all. And then they were going to help pay for it. And it bumps us up on the pay scale here in the States. And that's when I went, okay. But in my head, I'm like, I will never use it. I'll go get it, but I will not use it. And life's circumstances had me use it the very next year. So I went in reluctantly. I think sometimes those make the best principals, the people who never intended to go there.
As we wrap it up, are there any other things that you would want to say to someone who's either new in the principalship or who's even considering going into the principalship?
The first thing I want to say is, I think we're in a time in our country, and maybe I'm the old person now. I have come to think about that, but I think it is so critical that we have good, strong, relationship building people leading our schools right now, more than ever in my experience back to the 1990s. I just think it's more important than ever. So please give it consideration. I would say gain your experience. Like, I love a good minimum of 5 or 6 years of teaching, right? So that you've been in the field long enough to where you can talk the talk. I think it sets you up for some good, yeah, I've been there, I've done it kind of thing. And I think it's the reason I wrote the book. We can figure out the actions, the 5 big things we need to be doing, and it must be balanced with being the right kind of person who builds trust, who can handle conflict. I didn't know conflict would always be a part of this, but that's okay. When you're pushing a school forward, there's always going to be a little bit of, that's a good sign. I had to learn that. Okay, I got it. I can handle conflict. I can hold people accountable in good, trustworthy ways, right? I can lean positive. I can lean positive with people. I see so many that get wrapped up in this whirlwind of negativity. Everything's bad, everything's awful. It is bad. But as a leader, I'm going to lean positive. And here's what we're going to do at our school right here. I struggled with that, you all. People will look at my personality and say, well, I can't believe you struggled with that. Oh, I struggled with it a lot, because when people got upset with me or people could say one negative comment, I would perseverate on that forever. And I had to learn how to, in the midst of everything going on, continually lean positive. I did at the end of every week stop to begin journaling just a little bit. And hey, where could I have been better this week? Not beating myself up, but just reflection. Meditating, prayer time, whatever that might be for people, finding those moments of quiet and silence, it made me stronger. I wish I'd started sooner in the practice of those things. So I said a lot right there, Stan. But
Yeah.
You did. And it's been our tradition to give Shelley the last word.
okay.
And so, Shelley, once again, you get the last word.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. It just speaks to the work that we've done for decades now. And we've come in it from different careers and different points, but it's always been the same. It's the relational piece. And then we can get the other work done. Once that base is settled and firm and people know where you stand with that, the rest does fall into place with struggles, but it does come, it comes around, and it happens if we have good relationships.
Thank you, Shelley, for those comments. And I have 2 thoughts. My first one is silly, but I was hoping my name started with an S.
Oh,
So
I
I
know.
could
So you could be on the
in
team.
your
Yeah.
little team, right?
We can change that for you.
My second comment is this. I felt it when talking to Stan the other day, because I'm going to assume it's your experience, or at least I'm going to put you in the truck with me, that it's way too rare when I have that experience where a leader is all about relationships with her or his people. That's first. Then these other pieces come. But I don't hit that very often. So I think your work, I hope that the work that I am honored to get to do with principals and their teams, I hope we can just keep spreading this part of the work. But I'm honored to be with you all. I love your team. I'm amazed at your work, and I'll just keep listening to your podcast and things that I've seen.
Being a principal or vice principal is about relationships. Get to know each of your staff, students, and families. Effective principals get into the classroom, support teachers, and foster a culture of continuous learning. Find out more about our work with restorative practices and relational ways to promote student learning at www.restorative.ca. You can send me an email to stan@restorative.ca. If you're new to the role of principal or vice principal, take some time to reflect on what's most important to you about learning, and then let everyone know. It's deliberate and it takes courage.